Shas'O Vior'la Sept Mont'yr, more commonly known as Shovah or Commander Farsight, is the T'au leader of the Farsight Enclaves. The Farsight Enclaves are a breakaway rebel state, following their own version of the greater good, centered around a strongly martial tradition closely based on the Vior'la Sept, Shovah's birthplace. Commander Farsight is one of the oldest T'au ever recorded, having been born in the 8th century of M41. Born to the Fire Caste, the young Vior'lan absorbed and memorized every facet of the Vior'la Fire Warrior Training Academy. He spent much time in the Mont'yr Battle Dome War simulations and quickly became able to memorize the Code of Fire from end to end. He even deciphered the combat codes and signals used by his superiors, taking advantage of his knowledge to monitor their communiques. Despite being several years younger than most T'au within the Mont'yr Battle Dome, Shas'O quickly outperformed his classmates and eventually graduated with flying colors. During Shas'O's graduation from the academy, the legendary Commander Farsight was there to inspect the ceremony. Immediately after graduation and induction as a Shas'La, Shas'O and his graduating class were deployed to a war zone on a mission to combat the Arakan incursion of the Western Vale. Shas'La Shas'O made a great impact on the spirit of the Fire Caste troops stationed in the Vale and was closely observed by his old teachers with mixed opinions. Some saw great potential in the young warrior, but other former instructors had become disgusted with his arrogance. As a result, instructors such as Shas'O made sure Shas'O was assigned on the front line in every deployment on the Western Vale. His superiors had decided that if he truly were a prodigy born for glory, he would rise to the challenge, and if not, then a troublesome student would be out of the way. Despite these challenges, Shas'O performed well against the Arakan for the next 4 years as a Shas'La trooper. By the end of his tenure as a fire warrior, it was his suggestions that determined the vast majority of his unit's battle plans against the Arakan. His superior, the Cadre Fireblade, was eager to test his mettle in the trial by fire. The trial proved to be a traumatic experience for Shas'O, with many of the instructors wishing to finally teach him a lesson. As a result, he was put into a near-hopeless live-fire war dome exercise and died in the simulation, saving a teammate. Nonetheless, when he awoke from the simulation, he was informed that he had passed and would be promoted to Shas'O. As a result, the young T'au could finally pilot a battlesuit. Shas'O was initially assigned to a broadside battlesuit team and sent back to the Arakan war front. During the days, he learned the basics of battlesuit command from the veteran pilot Shas'O Oblotai. Shas'O saw combat for the first time in a crisis battlesuit during the final action of the war, as Commander Dawnstone led the warriors of Vior'la into a final push. The extremely bloody battle that followed saw Shas'O lose most of his left leg. Nonetheless, he performed well in the battle and was promoted to Saznami, leading the assault that killed the ruling Arakan Council, the Arakan Trinity. The assassination proved to be the final straw that broke the Arakan hold on the Western Vale, and the T'au emerged victorious after the long war. However, tragedy struck during a boarding operation of an Arakan cocoon ship led personally by Dawnstone. During the boarding, the T'au team came under attack from a swarm of Arakan skitterlings, and Shas'O sacrificed himself to save Commander Dawnstone. It was then, as the Arakans tore him apart, that Shas'O awoke in a medbay, completely intact. Dawnstone then came forward and revealed that the boarding operation was one final secret simulation to test him. Not only had he passed, but Shas'O's performance during the simulation was so impressive that he was made a disciple of the legendary Commander Farsight alongside Kais and Shas'O. The subsequent training under his new mentor was grueling, and with Kais and Shas'O, he was forced to survive the brutal conditions on Mount Kanji. However, under Farsight, Shas'O was able to master every aspect of the T'au art of war. He even made a point of following every presentation made by the Earth Caste on military equipment that he could, to the point of risking being labeled Vashya, a state of mind forbidden by the ethereals. As his proper military career began, Farsight's first and greatest victories were won in the Arkunasha War against the Orcs. When the T'au colony on the planet was threatened by the D'Okwar, under Warboss Tufjaw, he led the Fire Warriors in a masterful defense against many hordes of greenskins, many of which were forces several times larger than their own. Using the immense canyons and gullies crisscrossing the desert to maximum effect, Shovah set the Orc invaders to chase shadows, constantly boxing off and destroying isolated elements wherever they turned at bay, earning him the famous title Farsight for his actions. It was during this war, possibly due to his ongoing battles against Orc forces, that Shovah developed an affinity for close combat. Unlike most other T'au, Shovah came to believe that melee was an essential part of warfare and became a renowned master of aggressive Mont'yr doctrine. After the war had been won, Shovah was again called upon to defend the T'au Empire during the incursion of T'au space by the Imperium of Man in what the Imperium called the Damocles Crusade. Throughout the campaign, he was a major morale booster, and it was here he first encountered both humans and Astartes. At one point, he fought the then assault marines Cato Sicarius and Joris Numitor, and after almost being killed by Sicarius, Farsight pledged revenge against them. Beyond the Ultramarines, he also saw combat against the Scarlord's chapter under Chapter Master Kylos. The chapter launched an assault that reached the T'au world of Vior'la before ultimately being bested and annihilated by Farsight. 90% of the chapter was lost in the failed invasion, though Farsight's faith towards the Callous Ethereals was for the first time shaken during the fighting. Nonetheless, after several years of fighting, the wider war turned against the Imperium, and the crusade was abandoned. After the Imperial forces withdrew, Farsight led one of several reclamation fleets sent to recapture T'au worlds lost to the Imperium, eliminating Imperial deserters and abandoned guardsmen. Following the Damocles Crusade, Anva recommended an expedition to rekindle hope and spirit in the Empire, which had been dwindling since the bloody war against the Imperium. In the ensuing Farsight expedition, Farsight led an enormous T'au fleet across the Damocles Gulf, going into frozen stasis to avoid aging during the long trip. Arriving on the far side of the Damocles Gulf, Farsight's task force discovered a large contingent of Orcs had taken swathes of the region while the Imperium and T'au were fighting. Pledging to recapture the region for the greater good, Farsight was initially beaten at every turn by Grog Iron Teeth, the Orc warchief of Alsanta. Though frustrated, Shovah was nonetheless eventually able to defeat the warchief and pursued his scattered Orc forces to the world of Arthus Moloch. There, the Xenos force observed a number of strange and inexplicable phenomena, the most notable of which occurred during a battle for an ancient temple known as the Great Dais. Here, the battle turned sideways as the temple roared to life, unleashing terrifying red beasts wielding black energy swords. These monstrosities descended upon the battlefield, cutting down everything in sight, including Farsight's accompanying ethereals, who were killed to the last man. Farsight, however, discovered a mysterious blade, which allowed him to push back the beasts and close the portal, though he was briefly overcome by an extreme bloodlust. Though the battle had been won, the experience of battling these foes and gazing into their sinister portal rattled Shovah, who realized there were far greater threats than the ethereals would have him know. After the incident on Arthus Moloch, Farsight returned to his established holdings on the far side of the Damocles Gulf. Here, now completely isolated from the ethereals, he began to secretly become distrustful of their caste, coming to suspect that they may be controlling the T'au by more than simple charisma and wisdom. In the aftermath of his victory, Farsight identified the monsters as chaos demons of Khorne, and realized that the universe was not the orderly, rational place described in T'au philosophy. However, What he found even more concerning than the chaos threat was the realization that the Ethereals, as a caste, knew something of it, but had kept it from the wider T'au. At first, he merely thought their leadership was flawed, and that the other castes would be better off seeking harmony with each other without their oversight. However, as he ruminated on his own life, he began to recount the instances where obedience to the Ethereals had been taken to illogical and foolish extremes. He also recounted the times the actions taken under their guidance, which had seemed wise and even necessary, had come to later be seen as deplorable and wrong. It was during this period that he began to live long past the normal life expectancy of his species. The inevitable conclusion that the Ethereal's control extended beyond simple logic and loyalty to something darker drove him to sickening panic. Heresies began filling Farsight's mind, and not even he truly knew why. He came to believe that the truth he held could dissolve the Empire and drive the T'au back to the Mont'yr, a fate far worse than the Ethereal's rule. Thus, unwilling to tell anyone this truth, but unable to pretend or forget, Farsight chose exile over obedience. Back in the T'au Empire's heartland, the Ethereal Supreme Unvar discovered the death of the Ethereals on Arthus Moloch and the establishment of a seemingly independent T'au enclave under Farsight. Furious, he ordered Shovah to return to the Empire to explain what exactly had transpired. Instead of returning to the T'au Empire, however, Farsight established a series of fortified strongholds along the Damocles Gulf. Contact was severed between the Farsight Enclaves and the Ethereals, and after some probing, it was finally confirmed that Shovah had turned his back on the T'au Empire. Shortly after setting the foundations of the Farsight Enclaves, Shovah announced his intention to leave the Elemental Council and go into a self-imposed exile. Judging himself as unworthy, and having seen too much during the experience on Arthus Moloch, Farsight left administration of the Enclaves to 6 of his closest advisors and left to wander the wastelands of Vior'la. He abandoned his battlesuit and the Dawn Blade, which were both kept to be studied by Ovisa. Though he didn't realize it at the time, it was this decision to exile himself that ultimately saved him from corruption by the Chaos Gods Khorne and Tzeentch, who both had taken an interest in his soul on Arthus Moloch. Dwelling in the barren savanna of Vior'la for many years, Farsight sought a natural death, but found himself living vastly beyond the natural T'au lifespan, surviving in harsh environments with little effort. For many years he wandered these wastes, until 997 of M41, when he encountered Tyranids in the wastelands of Vior'la. Realizing the threat to his enclaves, Farsight returned to, once again, lead his people, just as the Hive Fleet invasion began. Before taking command, Farsight first visited a war museum that housed his battlesuit, shocking the staff, who initially did not believe he was who he claimed to be. Only when he was recognized by Ovisa was he allowed to take up his mantle and reunite with the Eight, the council of oligarch warriors he had established to lead the enclaves in war. During the subsequent campaign against the Tyranids, Farsight was mortally wounded by the Xenos, but was saved by Sub-Commander Torchstar, who had just defected to the enclaves. Torchstar would later become the 8th member of the Eight. Once aboard Torchstar's ship, the vision of Aunshi, Farsight, and Torchstar were betrayed by Torchstar's bondmate Pauvre Rivetel to the Ethereals. Farsight was taken upon the Sept spaceship, Hand of Unvar, where he was sentenced to face Malkla. Farsight emerged from his Malkla trial unharmed and was dragged before Unvar. The Ethereal then decorated his auditorium with images of Farsight's bondmates, Shadowson and Kais, as well as images of great victories Farsight had participated in, though with Farsight removed from them. He interrogated him further, and following an outburst from Farsight, where he described Unvar as the falsest of the Arn, challenged the commander to a duel. As befitting his rank as Arn, Anvar selected his bodyguard, Shas'O, to fight as his champion. Farsight, however, was forced to fight with an honor blade, a weapon he was unfamiliar with, causing him to be at such a disadvantage that T'au was able to sever his prosthetic leg. As Farsight was about to be killed, the room fell into shock, as the namesake of the ship, the ethereal Anshi, revealed himself to the council. Farsight in particular was awestruck, as he had believed Anshi to be long dead. Anshi provided Farsight with a spare prosthetic and announced his intention to fight as his second in the duel. Responding to his challenge, Anvar deployed his second bodyguard to the battle against Anshi and Farsight, who lost to the two. After Farsight and Anshi were victorious in their duel, Anvar reluctantly allowed Farsight to return to Vior'la Sept with Anshi, though he told Anshi that his actions defending Farsight would have supreme consequences. After he returned, Farsight led 80 battlesuits to drive the Xenos back, eventually repelling the invasion. Commander Farsight next appeared during the Second Exile campaign in the closing years of M41. Here, Showah deployed the full might of his forces alongside his former ally, Commander Shadowsun, and together, the two managed an effective but ultimately doomed resistance against the Imperium. After the battle, Showah disappeared and made course for T'au to rescue the planet from Hive Fleet Leviathan. Despite his aid to the Empire, the Ethereal Council ordered Shadowsun to immediately capture him, something she secretly leaked to the exiled commander to try and help him get a head start. After the Exile campaign, Farsight was again frustrated by constant Orc attacks on his enclaves in the renewed War of Daka. The Orcs were now led by the infamous Nazdreg, forcing Farsight to attack his world Dregrock despite its proximity to Arthus Moloch. While Farsight was successful in seemingly killing Nazdreg, who disappeared into a warp portal, Chaos forces under Ugalax arrived immediately afterwards in the Ark of Omen Unhallowed, seeking a key fragment on the planet for the demon lord Vashtor. Farsight was forced to return to the blighted world, once again in a fighting retreat, seeking to have the Orcs and Chaos armies destroy one another. However, the T'au took heavy losses, and during the fighting, Brightsword was killed, while Bravestorm and Oblotai were badly injured. These proved to frustrate Farsight, who began to apparently succumb to the influence of Khorne. The situation grew worse when Anvar personally rebuked his offer for aid, stating that he and his people were condemned for turning their backs on the greater good. The war on Arthus Moloch came to its head at the Great Star Dais, the very temple where he had first learned of chaos centuries ago. Now prepared, Farsight activated its portal with enemy blood and unleashed demons upon the Orc and Chaos armies. As the planet fell into pandemonium, Farsight momentarily gave into the fury of Khorne and became an avatar of the Blood God, his battlesuit transformed into a titan-sized axe-wielding monstrosity covered in the skulls of the ethereals he now hated. Farsight tore through Orc and Chaos behemoths and began to see himself as an army of one, coming to believe that any of his warriors that were too weak to survive on their own deserved their fate. However, the horror of this thought creeping into his mind drew Farsight back to sanity, and he shook off the corruption. Upon regaining his senses, he immediately ordered a retreat from Arthus Moloch and sought to save his warriors above any other objective. Farsight later returned to the world to examine the Great Dais and was pleased to find it was inactive and that organic life was returning to the world. As of M42, Farsight is still alive, and his enclaves are still established. Since the fall of Cadia, he has taken a much more active role in leading the enclaves. Though he still prefers to lead from the front lines, he is at this point over 300 years old, a fact which seems to defy the very basics of T'au biology. Nonetheless, he still has the energy to fight against the Ethereals, Orcs, Imperium, and any other hostile groups who seek to beset his people. Thank you for listening to this entry from the Warhammer 40,000 Lexicanum.